This is The Download from Sounds Profitable, your daily source for the essential news in the business of podcasting. I'm Gavin Gaddis. Here's what you need to know for today, Tuesday, June 9th. First up, Netflix, Tubi begin to make inroads as podcast platforms. Inside Audio Marketing takes a look at new Edison Research Podcast Metrics data, which has added Netflix and Tubi to its podcast listening and viewing tracking data. Both platforms have made significant inroads as video podcast destinations this year. Netflix launched video podcasts in January, and Tubi signed distribution agreements with AudioChuck and SiriusXM. According to Edison's Q1 2026 podcast metrics data, 14% of surveyed U.S. weekly podcast consumers age 13 plus currently listen to or watch podcasts on Netflix. Tubi scored 4%. YouTube remains firmly in the lead with 64%, followed by Spotify at 42%. Next up, $100 million to take a show off YouTube. In the latest issue of Media Built, we look at the Spotify and Netflix deal to take Jay Shetty's podcast, On Purpose, to exclusivity, which comes with the side effect of no more episodes on YouTube. Reportedly, the deal is valued at around $100 million over multiple years. Spotify gets global ad sales while Netflix gets On Purpose's video. As Steve Raisey notes, at least 4 buyers were exploring paying 9 figures to take On Purpose off YouTube, betting that the audience will follow the show to another medium. The next question is whether big-ticket Joe Rogan-size exclusivity deals still work, and whether audiences will follow a podcast off its original free platform. Oh boy, this is a big word for Elmo. New podcast for U.S. semi-quincentennial. From the cereal aisle to home goods, the number 250 and American flag colors are all over the shop. That's both figurative and literal because I have been to a Walmart recently, in anticipation of the country's birthday. Podcasts are getting in on the action, such as the new series from Pushkin Industries and Higher Ground, Reconstruction, The Unfinished Promise. Hosted by President Barack Obama, the 8-part series is currently available on Audible, and all episodes will be released from June 18th through July 16th. Even further back in U.S. history, Pushkin and Critical Frequency have partnered to launch First America, a 6-part podcast tracking the founding of the U.S. through indigenous perspectives, often left out of traditional historical narratives. The series will be hosted by journalist and activist Rebecca Nagel. On the subject of indigenous storytelling, digital media platform Indigenous House and production company Little Bear Audio will launch the podcast and video series The Indigenous Setlist, starting June 22nd, following how modern Native and Indigenous artists are, quote, redefining genres and creating today's most electrifying music, end quote. For our final top story, YouTube channel memberships for podcasters. At noon Eastern Time on Wednesday, June 17th, YouTube will be hosting a live webinar on how podcasters can set up and launch channel memberships. The presentation will feature YouTube strategic partner, manager, podcast, Stephanie Chan, and fan funding product activation manager, Cheryl Jasper. The two will cover best practices for creating perks and pricing tiers, strategies for converting casual listeners to engaged members, and host a live Q&A session. As for the rest of the news, Libsyn CEO Brandon Monahan guests on today's episode of Podcast Perspectives to discuss why he left Megaphone, podcast monetization tools, and how independent creators can position themselves for growth in a competitive podcast industry. Carrot, in partnership with SiriusXM and Creative Company, have published a new report titled The Power of Sound 2026. Kids and family streaming service Pinna has announced an upcoming 6th season of the award-winning children's podcast Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest. Backyard Ventures is now the exclusive advertising representative for Smashcast Media's podcasts, YouTube channels, and social platforms. Multicultural audio network Revolver Podcasts has announced worldwide distribution of There Are No Rules with Campbell McLaren, a new original podcast hosted by the titular UFC co-founder. Ozen FM co-founder Rodrigo Tigre guests on this week's episode of PodBiz to discuss the future of podcast advertising in Latin America. And finally, last week, HeadGum launched the official Jackass franchise podcast. I know the guitar riff is playing in your head right now. The new show, Jackass the Podcast with Johnny Knoxville and Jeff Tremaine, will launch June 18th. No points for guessing who hosts it. Be sure to check out the links to every article I just talked about by clicking the link in your show notes, which will take you to today's episode post on soundsprofitable.com, where you can also subscribe to get the newsletter version of the download sent to you every day. Today's issue was written and produced by myself, Molly DeMillier, Tom Webster, and Brian Barletta. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Gavin Gaddis, and we'll see you tomorrow.